So last week I did a video about Jagmeet Singh, the Canadian politician who is on track to become the first ever non-white major party candidate for Prime Minister of Canada. And in response, alert viewer Hawaii 50 noted that Antonio Costa, the current Prime Minister of Portugal, is also of Indian descent. His father was an immigrant from the Indian region of Goa, which used to be ruled by the Portuguese. And many other viewers reminded me that the current Prime Minister of Ireland is of Indian background as well. His dad is an immigrant from Mumbai. Anyway, it all got me thinking, just how common is it for countries to elect leaders who don't come from their country's majority racial group? Here are a couple I came up with. The first is obviously Barack Obama. His father was from Kenya, making him the first US president who was not entirely of European heritage. Even if the US elects another black president someday, Obama will still likely remain one of the most exotic presidents in US history simply because he was the son of an African migrant who came voluntarily to America. In contrast to the majority of African Americans, who are obviously the descendants of slaves who came to America many centuries ago. Speaking of Africa, obviously all of the presidents and prime ministers of South Africa and Zimbabwe Rhodesia were not members of their country's majority race until quite recently, because of course the majority race was not allowed to vote. More interesting is the case of this white guy who was president of Zambia from 2014 to 2015. His name is Guy Scott, and he was born in Zambia to British immigrant parents back when Zambia was part of Rhodesia and it was ruled by its white minority. But Scott himself was a proponent of black majority rule, and he rose through the ranks of opposition political parties until he was eventually elected vice president of the new country of Zambia in 2011. And then in 2014, he became president himself when the old president died. But he couldn't run for a full term because the Zambian constitution forbids the children of immigrants from running for president. Another black majority country that has had a lot of non-black leaders is Jamaica. Until relatively recently, all of the prime ministers of Jamaica were either mixed race or white. The most notable of these was this guy, Edward Sayaga, who was half white and half Lebanese and ran the country from 1980 to 1989. And since I know you're all wondering what he sounded like, here is a clip of him talking.
A good economy is an entitlement that one need not reward any leader for creating. If the economy is bad, they'll blame you. But if it is good, you're not necessarily getting the credit.
Speaking of the Caribbean, another interesting guy is Arthur Chung, who was president of Guiana from 1970 to 1980. As you can see, he was of Chinese background, which made him the first ever Asian man to lead a non-Asian country. In fact, the joke at the time was that Guiana got to elect a Chinese man before the Chinese did. But by far the most famous Asian guy ever elected to lead a non-Asian country was Alberto Fujimori, who was elected president of Peru in 1990. He was born in Peru to immigrants from Japan. But a lot of his political enemies didn't buy that, and there was this whole Obama-style birther conspiracy theory that he was actually secretly born in Asia. This would have disqualified him from the presidency, since much like in America, in Peru you cannot be president if you were born outside of the country. In any case, Fujimori was one of Peru's most important leaders of the 20th century, and his whole career and legacy is too complicated to get into here. Basically, he was one of those right-wing Latin American presidents who some people think was super great and other people think was a total monster. In any case, he is currently serving a long sentence in Peruvian jail for human rights abuses. Although last year his daughter, Keiko Fujimori, came quite close to being elected president in her own right. Interestingly enough, she lost to this guy, Pedro Pablo Kaczynski, who was the son of immigrants from Switzerland and Poland, making him Peru's whitest president in quite a long time. You know, the more I study the world, the more impressed I am at the sheer amount of stuff that's happened in it. Like, I'm almost certain that I've missed a lot of interesting racial minority politicians who have been elected to lead countries. The world is just too big and interesting for that to have not been the case. So anyway, let me know about all the guys I missed in the comments below. And by the way, do you think your country will ever elect a racial minority to power? If it hasn't already. I wouldn't have thought that Canada was poised to elect a non-white prime minister anytime soon, but now with Jagmeet Singh on the scene, who knows? Well, that's all for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps other people discover my videos. And by the way, if you want to be among the first to know when I release new videos, be sure to click on that little bell thing too. Oh yeah, and I do have a Patreon page too if you're into that sort of thing. See you next week.